The desert heat was finally releasing its grip on the day. Emily Carter stood behind the counter at Betty's diner, watching the sun sink toward the horizon, painting the Arizona sky in shades of burnt orange and deep purple. The old neon sign outside flickered, Beatty's Dinar. Half the letters had given up years ago, but everyone knew the place anyway. It sat alone on a forgotten stretch of Route 66, where the asphalt shimmered with heat mirages and tumbleweeds rolled across the empty highway like nature's own ticking clock. 27 years old, and Emily felt twice that age. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, a few strands escaping to frame a face that might have been pretty if it weren't so carefully blank. She'd learned to keep her expressions neutral, her voice steady, her movements efficient. The less people noticed about you, the fewer questions they asked. She wiped down the counter for the third time, even though it was already clean. Routine, structure, these things kept her grounded. "You're gonna wear a hole in that formica if you keep scrubbing," called Betty from the kitchen. The older woman, somewhere in her 60s with silver hair and laugh lines that told stories of a life well lived, poked her head through the serving window. "Why don't you take a break, honey? We've only got 4 customers and they're all finishing up." "I'm fine," Emily replied automatically. "I'll start prepping for the dinner shift." Betty's expression softened with concern, but she knew better than to push. She'd hired Emily 6 months ago when the young woman had walked in looking half-starved and desperate for work, asking no questions about the obvious shadows in her eyes, or the way she flinched at sudden noises. Emily moved methodically through the familiar tasks, refilling salt shakers, checking ketchup bottles, folding napkins into perfect triangles. Her hands never stopped moving. If they stopped, she might think. And thinking led to remembering, and remembering led to places she couldn't afford to go. The diner was simple: 12 red vinyl booths along the windows, 8 stools at the counter, black and white checkered floor that had seen better decades. Everything was clean but worn, comfortable in its own obsolescence. The jukebox in the corner only played country songs from the 70s, and the coffee was always fresh, even if it tasted like it had been filtered through sadness and regret. It was perfect for someone who wanted to disappear. Through the window, Emily could see the parking lot, gravel and dust, a few scattered vehicles, old Joe's pickup truck, a family in a minivan with out-of-state plates, a motorcycle that belonged to Danny, a regular who never said much but always left a decent tip. Normal, predictable, safe. Then she saw them. 3 black SUVs rolled into the parking lot like sharks cutting through water. Pristine, expensive vehicles that had no business being on this forgotten stretch of highway. The windows were tinted so dark they looked like holes in reality. They moved in formation, parking in a deliberate semicircle facing the diner entrance. Emily's heart rate spiked immediately. Her military training kicked in before conscious thought. Assess, analyze, prepare. The vehicle's positioning was tactical, professional. These weren't lost tourists. "Betty," she called quietly, not taking her eyes off the parking lot. "Maybe you should head to the back for a bit." The older woman came to the window, drying her hands on her apron. Her smile faded when she saw the SUVs. Oh, Lord. The other customers noticed too. Old Joe dropped a 20 on his table without waiting for change and headed for the door, nodding apologetically to Emily as he passed. The family quickly gathered their children, the father's protective hand on his wife's back as they hurried out. Danny was already on his motorcycle, engine roaring to life. Within 2 minutes, the diner was empty except for Emily and Betty. "You should go too," Emily said firmly. "I can handle this." "Emily, honey, I don't think—" "Please." Emily's voice was steady despite the tremor running through her hands. "I've dealt with worse." Betty hesitated, then squeezed Emily's shoulder. "I'll be in the kitchen. You holler if you need anything, you hear?" The door to the first SUV opened. 2 men stepped out first. Both wore dark suits despite the heat, sunglasses despite the fading light. They moved with the kind of controlled precision that came from training. Not military, but something else. Something harder. They scanned the area, hands resting near their jackets in a way that made Emily's stomach tighten. Then he emerged. Vincenzo Moretti didn't need an introduction. Everything about him announced his presence like a shout in a silent room. He was tall, over 6 feet, with dark hair silvering at the temples. His suit probably cost more than Emily made in 6 months. But it wasn't the expensive clothes or the commanding height that captured attention. It was something else. An aura of absolute authority, the kind of power that didn't need to be demonstrated because everyone already knew it was there. He was 40, maybe a few years older, with the kind of weathered handsomeness that came from a life lived on dangerous edges. His face was angular, strong-jawed, with dark eyes that missed nothing. There was something old-world about him, a formality, a precision of movement that spoke of different customs, different rules. The three men walked toward the diner entrance. Emily's hands were shaking now, trembling so badly she had to grip the edge of the counter to steady herself. It wasn't fear exactly, though there was plenty of that. It was recognition. She'd seen men like this before in different contexts, different continents. Men who carried violence like other people carried wallets, casual and always accessible. The bell above the door chimed, an absurdly cheerful sound. Vincenzo entered first, his guards flanking him. The temperature in the room seemed to drop despite the residual heat. He removed his sunglasses with deliberate care, revealing eyes that were darker than she'd expected. Intelligent, calculating, missing nothing. His gaze swept the diner, cataloging exits, assessing threats, evaluating everything in seconds. When his eyes landed on Emily, she forced herself not to look away. In her experience, predators responded to fear. Show weakness, and you invited attack. Good evening, Vincenzo said. His voice was deep, accented, Italian, but smoothed by years in America. Are you still serving? Emily found her voice. Yes, sir. Please, sit anywhere you'd like. He chose a booth by the window. Of course he did. Maximum visibility of the parking lot and entrance. His guards didn't sit. They positioned themselves near the door and the kitchen entrance. Professional, contained, terrifying in their efficiency. Emily grabbed a menu with hands she couldn't quite steady and approached the booth. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but she'd learned long ago that running didn't solve anything. She'd run from Afghanistan straight into nightmares that followed her across oceans. Can I get you something to drink? Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Vincenzo studied her for a moment, really looked at her. It wasn't the leering gaze she sometimes got from truckers or the dismissive glance of people who looked right through service workers. This was assessment, reading, understanding. Espresso if you have it. I'm sorry, we don't. We have coffee, regular or decaf. A slight smile touched his lips. Of course, black coffee then, hot, and to eat. What do you recommend? The question surprised her. She'd expected him to order decisively, someone used to knowing exactly what he wanted. The meatloaf is good. Betty makes it fresh daily. Comes with mashed potatoes and green beans. Then I'll have that. Emily wrote it down even though she'd remember, needing something to do with her hands. As she turned to leave, his voice stopped her. Miss? She turned back. Yes? Your name? Protocol screamed at her not to answer. But something in his tone, not demanding, just asking, made her respond. Emily. He nodded once. Thank you, Emily. She retreated to the kitchen on legs that felt like water. Betty was peering through the serving window, worry creasing her face. You okay, honey? Fine. Emily wasn't fine. Her heart was racing, her breathing shallow. She recognized the signs, panic trying to claw its way up her throat. She forced it down with practiced efficiency. 1 meatloaf special. Coffee, black. As she prepared the coffee, she tried to analyze the situation rationally. These men were clearly dangerous. Probably criminals, the SUVs, the guards, the way they moved. But they weren't here for trouble. At least not with her. This was a stop, nothing more. Serve them, take their money, watch them leave. Simple. Her hand still shook as she poured the coffee. When she brought it to the table, Vincenzo was looking out the window at the darkening desert. The dying light cast shadows across his face, highlighting the sharp planes and angles. He looked tired, she realized. Beneath the armor of expensive clothes and controlled power, there was a weariness she recognized. Your coffee, she said, setting the cup down carefully. As she placed it on the table, her sleeve rode up slightly, just a few inches. Enough. Vincenzo's gaze dropped to her forearm. His entire demeanor shifted, subtle but unmistakable. The casual weariness vanished, replaced by sharp focus. Emily realized what he was seeing. The tattoo. She usually kept it covered, but the heat had made her roll up her sleeves earlier. Now exposed under the diner's fluorescent lights was the insignia of the 75th Ranger Regiment, inked in black and gray on her inner forearm. Below it, a date. Above it, names she tried not to read when she looked in mirrors. She tugged her sleeve down quickly, but it was too late. He'd seen it, and from the way his expression changed, he'd recognized it. You served, he said quietly. Not a question. Emily's throat tightened. Yes, sir. Rangers. Yes, sir. A long moment of silence. His guards had noticed the shift in atmosphere and were more alert now, hands slightly closer to their jackets. But Vincenzo raised a hand slightly, a small gesture that made them relax incrementally. How long? 5 years, 2 deployments. The words came out mechanical. Facts without feeling. The only way she could talk about it. Vincenzo studied her face, and Emily had the unsettling sensation that he was seeing past all her carefully constructed walls. Seeing the nightmares, the guilt, the way she jumped at car backfires and couldn't sleep without checking the locks 3 times. Afghanistan? He asked softly. She nodded, not trusting her voice. Something shifted in his eyes. Recognition of a different kind. I know what that's like, he said quietly. Different war, different uniform, but I know. Emily didn't know what to say to that. This man, clearly dangerous, clearly involved in things she didn't want to understand, claiming kinship through trauma. It should have seemed manipulative, but something in his voice rang true. Your food will be ready soon, she managed, retreating before he could say anything else. In the kitchen, she leaned against the wall, forcing her breathing to steady. Betty was there immediately, maternal concern radiating from every gesture. What did he say to you? Nothing, it's fine. Emily pushed off the wall. Food ready? Almost. Betty's eyes were worried. Emily, if you need to leave, I'm fine. She wasn't. Really. The meatloaf was perfect, as always. Emily plated it carefully, adding the sides, making sure everything looked presentable, professional, normal, as if this were just another customer and not someone who made the air itself feel dangerous. When she brought the plate out, Vincenzo was on his phone, speaking in rapid Italian, his tone sharp with authority. He ended the call as she approached, switching personas seamlessly back to the courteous customer. It looks excellent, he said. Can I get you anything else, more coffee? Not right now, thank you. Emily nodded and started to turn away. His voice stopped her again. Emily. She looked back. Thank you for your service. He said it with such sincerity, such genuine respect, that it caught her completely off guard. Truly. Her throat constricted. People said that sometimes, thank you for your service, but usually it was automatic, meaningless. This felt different, like he understood what those words meant, what they cost. You're welcome, she whispered. She spent the next 30 minutes trying to look busy, while hyper-aware of every movement from the booth. Vincenzo ate slowly, methodically. His guards remained statue still. The only sound was the quiet clink of silverware and the hum of the refrigerator. The sun had fully set now, darkness pressing against the windows. The diner's lights seemed too bright, too exposed. Emily found herself checking the parking lot repeatedly, looking for, what? More vehicles? Police? She didn't know what she expected, only that the tension was exhausting. Finally, Vincenzo set down his fork. The meal was finished, the plate clean. He dabbed his mouth with the paper napkin, somehow making even that gesture look elegant, and stood. One of his guards immediately moved to the register while the other held the door. Emily met them at the counter, pulling out her order pad. How was everything? Excellent. Please give my compliments to the cook. She calculated the bill quickly. That'll be $15.47. The guard pulled out a wallet, a substantial leather thing, and extracted bills. Emily expected 20s. Instead, he handed her 5 $100 bills. Her eyes widened. Sir, this is way too much. Keep it, Vincenzo said from the door. His dark eyes met hers one more time. Consider it a tip and... He paused, something unreadable crossing his face. If you ever need anything, anything at all, ask around about Vincenzo Moretti. Someone will find me. Before Emily could process that statement, before she could protest the absurd amount of money or question why a man like him would make such an offer to a waitress he'd just met, he was gone. The guards followed, and within seconds, the 3 SUVs were pulling out of the parking lot, disappearing into the desert night as smoothly as they'd arrived. Emily stood at the counter, $500 in her trembling hands, her mind racing. Betty emerged from the kitchen, relief obvious on her face. They're gone. Thank God. Are you okay, honey? Yes, I think so. Did they give you any trouble? Emily looked down at the money. No trouble. But that wasn't entirely true, because as she stood there in the too bright diner alone except for Betty, Emily felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not fear. She'd learned to live with fear. Not even confusion, though she was certainly confused. She felt seen. For the first time since she'd come back from Afghanistan, since she'd lost her unit and her sense of purpose, since she'd learned that surviving sometimes felt worse than the alternative, someone had looked at her and seen the soldier beneath the waitress uniform, had recognized the weight she carried, and somehow, impossibly, it had been a man who clearly walked on the dark side of every law she'd once sworn to uphold. Emily locked the money in the register, mechanically finished her closing duties, and said goodnight to Betty. She drove back to her tiny apartment on autopilot, her mind replaying every moment of the encounter. In her studio apartment, just a bed, a kitchenette, and a bathroom, she finally let herself shake, let the adrenaline crash hit her without fighting it. She sat on the edge of her bed, head in her hands, and tried to understand what had just happened. The tattoo on her arm seemed to burn under her skin. She pulled up her sleeve and stared at it. The insignia that had once made her proud now felt like a brand, a reminder of who she'd been before everything fell apart. Names stared back at her from her skin. Rodriguez, Chen, Patterson, Miller, friends who hadn't made it home. "I'm sorry," she whispered to them, like she did most nights. "I'm so sorry." Her phone buzzed. A text from Betty. "You sure you're okay? That was intense." Emily typed back, "Fine. See you tomorrow." But she wasn't fine, and something told her that tomorrow wouldn't be just another normal day, because Vincenzo Moretti had walked into her life, recognized something in her that even she tried to hide, and left a door open, an offer, a possibility of what? She didn't know. She lay back on her bed without changing clothes, staring at the ceiling, unable to shake the memory of dark eyes that had seen through every defense she'd built. "Different war," he'd said, "but I know." And the terrifying part was, Emily believed him. Outside, the desert night was vast and empty. Inside, Emily felt the same way, until tonight, when a dangerous stranger had made her feel, for just a moment, less alone. She didn't sleep. She rarely did. But tonight, the insomnia felt different, not haunted by ghosts of the past, but restless with questions about what came next. In the darkness, her tattoo seemed to pulse with memory and meaning, a symbol of service, of loyalty, of brothers and sisters in arms, and somehow, impossibly, a bridge between her world and one she never imagined touching. The night stretched on, questions multiplying like shadows, and Emily knew with absolute certainty that her carefully controlled, deliberately small life had just become infinitely more complicated. Emily didn't go back to the diner the next day. She called Betty early in the morning, her voice rough from lack of sleep, and asked for the day off. Betty agreed immediately, concern evident even through the phone line. "Take care of yourself, honey. Take 2 days if you need them." Emily spent the first few hours of daylight doing what she always did when memories pressed too close. She ran. The desert stretched endlessly around her apartment complex, and she pushed herself hard, feet pounding against packed earth, lungs burning with dry air. Pain was good. Pain meant she was alive. Pain meant she wasn't back there. But even as her body moved, her mind wouldn't stop replaying the previous night. Those dark eyes. That voice. I know what that's like. By noon, sweating and exhausted, she returned to her apartment. The $500 sat on her small kitchen table where she'd left it, still feeling wrong somehow. Too much. Too personal. Like accepting it meant accepting something else she couldn't name. She showered, standing under lukewarm water longer than necessary, then made coffee. The bad instant kind that tasted nothing like Betty's. Sitting at her laptop, an old machine she'd bought third-hand, Emily did what she'd been avoiding all morning. She searched for Vincenzo Moretti. The results made her stomach drop. Articles from the New York Times, the Washington Post, even the FBI's most wanted archives from years back. Photos of him younger, harder, emerging from courthouses surrounded by lawyers. Headlines that used words like alleged, suspected, organized crime, influential family. Vincenzo Moretti was the current head of one of the most powerful Italian-American families in the Northeast. His organization, they never called it a family in the articles, always organization or enterprise, had operations spanning from New York to Florida, involved in everything from construction to waste management to ports and shipping. The articles were careful. No direct accusations stuck. Charges filed but never proven. Witnesses who disappeared or recanted. A man who operated in shadows while somehow remaining visible enough to be photographed at charity galas and legitimate business openings. Emily sat back, coffee going cold in her hands. This was who had walked into Betty's diner. This was who had seen her tattoo and said, "Thank you for your service," like he meant it. She should be terrified. Should be planning to quit and move again, like she'd done twice before when life got complicated. But instead she found herself studying his photographs, looking for something she couldn't quite identify. In the older photos, he looked harder, colder, eyes like chips of obsidian. But in the more recent ones, taken at some charity event for children's hospitals, there was something different, a weariness around the eyes, a weight that reminded her of how she felt every morning when she looked in mirrors. Different war, he'd said. What war had he fought? Emily's phone buzzed. A text from Betty. "You sure you're okay? Don't worry about money, take time if you need it." She should be grateful. Betty was the first person in years who'd shown her genuine kindness without expecting anything in return. The older woman had hired Emily with no questions, had covered for her when panic attacks made her lock herself in the bathroom, had never pushed for details about her past. Emily typed back, "I'm fine. See you tomorrow. Promise." But she wasn't fine. And the proof was that instead of closing her laptop and trying to forget about Vincenzo Moretti, she kept reading. There was an older article buried deep in the search results from 15 years ago. It detailed an incident overseas, a military contractor operation gone wrong in Iraq. Several Americans had been in danger. The article mentioned that one of the rescued individuals was connected to an influential East Coast family, but provided no names. Emily's military mind put pieces together. Vincenzo would have been in his mid-20s then, the right age for a younger brother to be working overseas, and his reaction to her Ranger tattoo suddenly made more sense. She closed the laptop abruptly, as if distance from the screen could distance her from the information. This was insane. She was researching a criminal because he'd been polite and left a big tip. She was creating connections and narratives that probably didn't exist. He was just a man passing through, nothing more. But even as she told herself that, Emily knew she was lying. 300 miles away in a private office in a building that officially housed import-export businesses, Vincenzo Moretti sat behind a mahogany desk reviewing reports, numbers, shipments, territories, the legitimate face of operations that couldn't be discussed in daylight. His second-in-command, Carlo Romano, sat across from him. Carlo was 50, graying, and had been with the family for 30 years. He knew when to speak and when to wait. Vincenzo signed the last document and set down his pen. "What else?" "The situation in Phoenix is resolved. No complications." "Good." Vincenzo leaned back in his chair. "And the new arrangement with the unions?" "Finalized. Everything's documented properly." Carlo paused, then added carefully, "There's one other matter." "Yes?" "Your detour last night. To that diner." Carlo's tone was neutral, but his meaning was clear. Unnecessary stops created unnecessary questions. Vincenzo studied his oldest friend. "You have concerns?" "I have curiosity. We were 40 minutes from the safe house. We stopped at a random roadside establishment. You've never done that before." "I was hungry." Carlo's expression said he didn't believe that for a second. "Enzo, you've known me long enough to skip the deflections. What was at that diner?" Vincenzo was silent for a long moment, gazing out the window at the city below. Finally he spoke. "Do you remember my brother?" The question made Carlo's face soften. "Of course. Luca. God rest him. Do you remember what I told you about how he was saved? In Iraq? The Rangers. You said Army Rangers pulled him out when that contract operation went sideways." Vincenzo nodded slowly. "Luca spent 3 weeks with them before he could be extracted safely. He talked about those soldiers for the rest of his life, said they treated him like one of their own even though they had no reason to, even though helping him put them at risk." Carlo waited, understanding dawning. "The waitress at that diner," Vincenzo continued quietly. "She has the 75th Ranger Regiment insignia tattooed on her arm, along with names and a date. Her unit? Most likely." Vincenzo's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "She's young, 27, 28 maybe, which means she served recently. Afghanistan, probably. And you felt you owed her something because of Luca." "I owed her brothers and sisters something. They saved my brother when no one else would have." Vincenzo's voice carried an edge of old pain. "And even though Luca died 2 years later anyway, those extra years mattered. I got to reconcile with him. Got to tell him things I should have said earlier." Carlo nodded slowly. "So the tip was gratitude." "The tip was inadequate gratitude. But it was something." Vincenzo turned back to his desk. We won't be returning to that area. There's no reason to complicate that young woman's life. But even as he said it, Vincenzo knew he was lying to himself. Something about Emily Carter, he'd learned her full name from the diner's business license visible on the wall, had lodged in his mind like a splinter. The way her hands shook, but her voice stayed steady. The shadows in her eyes that matched the ones he saw in mirrors. The careful blankness of someone who'd learned to hide pain behind routine. He recognized her because he was her, just in different clothing. We should focus on the Phoenix situation, Vincenzo said, forcing his attention back to business. What's the timeline? But later that night, alone in his penthouse apartment that felt more like a museum than a home, Vincenzo found himself thinking about a roadside diner and a young woman who carried war on her skin and in her eyes. 2 days later, Emily returned to work. Betty greeted her with a hug and a searching look but asked no invasive questions. The dinner shift was busy. A bus tour had stopped, filling the diner with retirees excited about their Route 66 adventure. Emily fell into the rhythm gratefully. Orders, refills, clearing tables. The mechanical nature of service industry work was soothing. She didn't have to think, just perform. She was clearing booth 4 when the bell above the door chimed. Her body knew before her brain processed it. That shift in atmospheric pressure, that subtle change in ambient noise as other customers unconsciously responded to a new presence. Vincenzo Moretti stood in the doorway, alone this time. No guards, no SUVs visible through the window. Just a man in dark jeans and a black button-down shirt, expensive but understated. He looked different in casual clothes, more human, less like a figure from a news article. Their eyes met across the diner. He nodded slightly. Emily's heart hammered against her ribs. "Sit anywhere you'd like," she called out, proud that her voice didn't shake. He chose the same booth as before. Of course he did. Emily finished with her current customers, forcing herself to move at normal speed even though every instinct screamed at her to either run toward or away from him. She grabbed a menu and approached the booth. "Good evening," she said. "Coffee? Please. Black. I'll be right back." In the kitchen, Betty was plating the burger for the family in booth 2. She glanced at Emily. "You okay? You look pale." "Fine. Just tired." Emily poured the coffee, hands steadier than they should be. Maybe she'd used up all her shaking on his first visit. When she brought the coffee to Vincenzo, he was looking out the window at the desert, now visible in late afternoon light. The setting sun cast gold across his features, highlighting the silver at his temples. "Thank you," he said as she set down the cup. "Ready to order? What do you recommend today? The chicken fried steak is popular, or the pot roast if you prefer something less heavy." "Pot roast, then." Emily wrote it down, started to turn away. His voice stopped her. "Emily." Her name and his accent sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. She turned back. "Yes? May I ask you something?" "Every defense system activated." "That depends on the question." A slight smile touched his lips, appreciation for her directness. "You were 75th? Here it was. The conversation she'd known was coming. "Yes. Afghanistan? 2 tours." He nodded slowly, processing. "Combat?" The word hit her like a physical blow. Images flashed. Dust, noise, the smell of fear and sand and things she couldn't name. Her breathing wanted to speed up, but she controlled it with practiced effort. "Yes." The word came out clipped. "I'm sorry. That was intrusive." Vincenzo's expression shifted to something like regret. "I have no right to ask you about that." "Then why did you?" The question came out sharper than intended, but Emily was tired of games, tired of not understanding what this man wanted from her. He met her eyes directly. "Because I recognize something in you. Because I've seen that look before. In mirrors. In the faces of people who've been places that change you permanently." He paused. "And because my younger brother was saved by Army Rangers in Iraq 15 years ago, I owed them a debt I could never repay." Emily's breath caught. So her research had been accurate. "Your brother, he passed away some years later, unrelated circumstances. But those soldiers, your brothers and sisters in arms, they gave me 2 more years with him, years where we reconciled, where I could tell him things I'd been too proud to say before." The raw honesty in his voice disarmed her completely. This wasn't manipulation. This was genuine grief, carefully controlled but unmistakable. "I'm sorry for your loss," Emily said quietly, "and I'm sorry for yours." His eyes dropped briefly to where her sleeve covered her tattoo. "The names. They're people you lost." It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. "My unit. An incident during our second deployment. And you survived. Yes. The word tasted like ash. That must be difficult. No platitudes. No, you should be grateful or it's not your fault. Just acknowledgement of the weight. Emily found herself sitting down across from him without consciously deciding to. Professionalism be damned. This conversation required more than standing at attention like a servant. Why are you here? She asked directly. You clearly don't need a roadside diner. So why come back? Vincenzo considered the question carefully. Honestly, I'm not entirely sure. Perhaps because in a life where everyone wants something from me, you looked at me with fear but not calculation. Perhaps because I saw something of myself in you. Or perhaps, he smiled faintly, because that meatloaf really was excellent. Despite everything, Emily almost laughed. Betty will be pleased to hear that. May I tell you something? Vincenzo asked. Something I think you might understand. She nodded, not trusting her voice. I've spent 20 years in a world that requires certain moral flexibilities. I've done things I'm not proud of, made decisions that keep me awake at night, and for a long time I told myself it was necessary, that I was protecting family, honoring traditions, maintaining order in chaos. He paused, looking down at his coffee. But the truth is simpler and darker. I did those things because I'd already done the first one, and after that, each subsequent choice felt inevitable. Like I'd crossed a line and couldn't find my way back. Emily understood that feeling more than he could know. The point of no return. Exactly. His dark eyes met hers. You feel that way too, don't you? Like something happened, and afterward, you couldn't be the person you were before. Her throat constricted. How did you? Because I recognize it. That look, like you're watching life from behind glass, present but separated, going through motions because that's what's expected, but not really living. Tears threatened. Emily blinked them back fiercely. I don't know you. You don't know me. Why are you saying these things? Because sometimes strangers are the only people we can be honest with. Because they don't have expectations, don't need us to be anything except what we are. Betty appeared at the kitchen window, holding up a plate questioningly. Emily nodded, grateful for the interruption. She stood, needing distance from the intensity of the conversation. Your food will be ready in a minute. But as she started to walk away, Vincenzo spoke again. Emily, one more thing. She turned. He pulled out a card from his wallet. Plain, cream-colored, with only a phone number embossed in black. He held it out to her. If you ever need anything at all, call this number. Emily stared at the card like it was a live grenade. Why would I need to call you? I don't know that you will, but the world can be a difficult place, especially for those of us carrying weight. And sometimes having one person who understands, even tangentially, can make the difference between surviving and drowning. Slowly, Emily reached out and took the card. It felt heavier than it should, weighted with implication and possibility. Thank you, she said quietly. Vincenzo nodded. Thank you, for listening, and for what you did even if you don't feel you deserve gratitude for it. Emily fled to the kitchen, card burning in her pocket. Betty immediately caught her expression. What did he say to you? Nothing. Everything. I don't know. Emily pressed her palms against the cool metal of the prep counter, trying to ground herself. Who is he really? Betty's eyes were worried. I don't know, honey. But men like that, they're complicated, dangerous, even if they're being kind. I know. Emily did know. Every instinct told her to throw away the card, forget this ever happened, maintain the careful distance she'd established from anything that might matter. But she didn't throw away the card. She brought out Vincenzo's pot roast, set it down without meeting his eyes, and retreated. He ate slowly, methodically, in no apparent rush, left another absurdly large tip, $200 this time, and departed with a simple good evening to both Emily and Betty. After he left, Emily stood at the window watching his car, a dark sedan, expensive but not flashy, disappear down the highway. You gonna tell me what's going on? Betty asked gently. Emily pulled out the card, staring at the number. I think I just made a friend I'm not sure I should have. That night in her apartment, Emily did something she hadn't done since leaving the service. She pulled out a box from her closet, the one containing things from her old life, photos of her unit, her discharge papers, letters from families of the people she'd lost, and at the bottom, wrapped in cloth, her dog tags. She held them, feeling the weight of metal and memory. Rodriguez, Chen, Patterson, Miller, her friends, her family, the people she'd failed. I don't know what I'm doing, she whispered to their ghosts. I don't know if I'm supposed to move forward or if that's betraying you. I don't know if accepting kindness from a stranger makes me weak or just tired of being alone. No answer came. It never did. But Emily kept the card on her nightstand. Kept it when she should have thrown it away. Kept it because part of her, the part she tried to silence, whispered that maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to carry everything alone forever. Outside, the desert night was vast and silent. Inside, Emily Carter sat with her memories and her choices, and for the first time in years, wondered if there might be a path forward that didn't look like the path behind. It was terrifying. It was also, unexpectedly, the smallest flicker of something that might have been hope. 2 weeks passed. Emily fell back into routine, or tried to. Work, home, running in the desert. The same mechanical existence she'd perfected over the past year. Except now there was a card on her nightstand with a phone number she hadn't called but couldn't throw away. Vincenzo hadn't returned to the diner. Part of her felt relieved. Part of her, a part she didn't want to examine, felt disappointed. It was a Thursday evening, late shift, when everything changed. The dinner rush had ended. Only 3 customers remained. Old Joe nursing his coffee, a young couple sharing a piece of pie, and a man Emily hadn't noticed come in. He sat in the back booth, baseball cap pulled low, face in shadow. Something about him set her nerves on edge immediately. Military training never really left you. That sixth sense for threat assessment. The way your body knew danger before your brain processed why. Emily approached with her order pad. Evening. What can I get you? The man looked up. Recognition hit her like ice water. Marcus Webb. She hadn't seen him in 3 years. Not since they'd both been stateside between deployments. He'd been a military contractor then, working in gray areas that regular army didn't touch. There were rumors about him. Nothing proven, but enough to make people uncomfortable. Well, Marcus's smile didn't reach his eyes. Emily Carter. Didn't expect to find you in a place like this. Her hand tightened on the order pad. Marcus, what are you doing here? Just passing through. Imagine my surprise seeing you through the window. He leaned back, studying her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. You're a hard woman to find. Changed your phone number. Moved twice. Almost like you didn't want to be found. What do you want? Emily kept her voice level despite the panic building in her chest. Just to catch up. We're old friends, aren't we? Served in the same theater. Kandahar, right? He said the word deliberately, watching her reaction. Emily's breath caught. Kandahar, where everything had gone wrong, where her unit had... I'll have coffee, Marcus said casually. Black, we can talk when you bring it. Emily wanted to refuse, wanted to tell him to leave, but old Joe and the couple were watching now, curious about the tension. Making a scene would raise questions she couldn't answer. She brought the coffee with shaking hands, setting it down without getting too close to the table. Sit with me, Marcus said. It wasn't a request. I'm working. Your shift ends in 20 minutes. I checked. I'll wait. His smile was cold. Unless you want to have this conversation in front of your customers. Your choice. Emily's stomach turned. She glanced at Betty, visible through the kitchen window. The older woman was already frowning, sensing something wrong. Fine. 20 minutes. The next 20 minutes crawled by like hours. Emily mechanically cleaned tables, refilled drinks, her mind racing. What did Marcus want? How had he found her? And why now, after 3 years of blessed silence? Finally, the couple left. Old Joe headed out with his usual wave. Betty started her closing routine in the kitchen. Marcus remained in his booth, patient as a predator. Emily had no choice. She slid into the seat across from him, maintaining maximum distance. So, Marcus began, sipping his coffee. Quite the fall from grace. Army ranger to waitress. How's that working out for you? What do you want, Marcus? Direct. I always liked that about you. He set down his cup. I want to talk about Kandahar, about what really happened that day. Emily's blood ran cold. I don't talk about that. No? Not even to therapists? Because I know you saw a few of those. PTSD diagnosis, full disability rating. Must be nice getting paid for the rest of your life because you survived. The cruelty in his voice made her flinch. If you came here to insult me, I came here because we have unfinished business. See, I was in Kandahar too. Different unit, different mission. But I was there, and I heard things. Stories about a ranger who let her team walk into a situation when she knew better. Who hung back while they went forward. That's not what happened. Emily's voice was barely a whisper. Isn't it? Because the official report is pretty vague. Enemy engagement resulting in casualties. But the unofficial version? The one people whispered about? That's more interesting. Tears burned Emily's eyes. You don't know anything. I know you lived and they didn't. I know you carry 4 names on your arm like they absolve you somehow. I know you've been running ever since, hiding in places like this, pretending you're not exactly what you are. Which is what? The words came out broken. Marcus leaned forward. A coward who let good soldiers walk into danger to save herself. The words struck like physical blows. Every nightmare, every guilt-soaked thought Emily had battled for 3 years, spoken aloud by someone who had no right to voice them. Get out, she managed. Now. Or what? You'll call the police? Go ahead. I'd love to have a conversation with them about what really happened over there. I'm sure your nice boss would be fascinated to know exactly who she hired. Betty emerged from the kitchen, reading the tension immediately. Everything okay out here? Marcus stood smoothly, pulling cash from his wallet and tossing it on the table. Everything's fine. Just catching up with an old friend. We'll be seeing each other again real soon, Emily. We have a lot more to discuss. He walked out, the bell above the door chiming with obscene cheerfulness. Emily sat frozen, unable to move, unable to breathe properly. The walls of the diner seemed to close in. Her hands shook so badly she had to clasp them together under the table. Emily? Betty's voice seemed to come from far away. Honey, who was that man? Someone from my past. Emily forced herself to stand on legs that felt like water. I need to go. I'm sorry. Emily, wait. But she was already moving, grabbing her jacket, practically running to her car. She drove home on autopilot, muscle memory guiding her when conscious thought had failed. In her apartment, she paced. 4 steps to the window, 4 steps back. The panic attack she'd been suppressing crashed over her like a wave. Breathing became difficult. The room spun. Kandahar. The word echoed in her mind like a curse. They'd been on a routine patrol. Emily had been point, leading her team through a marketplace. Something had felt wrong. She'd sensed it, that intuition soldiers develop when they survive long enough. The kind of quiet that wasn't peaceful, just absent. The way people weren't meeting their eyes. She'd stopped, hesitated. Rodriguez had asked what was wrong. Emily had said she didn't know. Just a feeling. Rodriguez had laughed. Kind, brave Rodriguez who never met a situation he couldn't face with a smile, and said feelings weren't actionable intel. They'd moved forward. Emily had followed, but slower. Something in her screaming to stop, to wait, to check. The explosion had come 30 seconds later. Emily had been far enough back to survive with minor injuries. Her team had been at the epicenter. By the time the dust cleared, Rodriguez was gone. Chen was gone. Patterson was gone. Miller was gone. And Emily had lived. The official investigation cleared her. No way to predict the attack. Standard patrol protocols followed. Not her fault. But Emily knew the truth. She'd felt something was wrong. She'd hesitated while they pushed forward. She'd survived, because she'd been afraid. Now Marcus was here, dredging up everything she'd tried to bury. And worse, he was right. She was a coward who'd let good people go forward while she held back. Emily's hands found the card on her nightstand before she consciously decided to reach for it. The phone number seemed to pulse under her fingers. She shouldn't call. Vincenzo was a stranger. A dangerous stranger involved in things she wanted no part of. Calling him meant crossing a line she couldn't uncross. But Marcus's words echoed. We'll be seeing each other again real soon. It wasn't an idle threat. Marcus hadn't come all this way just to deliver insults. He wanted something. And Emily had no defenses, no resources, no one to turn to, except possibly one person who'd offered help without conditions. Her hands shook as she dialed the number. It rang 3 times. Then a voice. Yes? Not Vincenzo. Someone else. Male, older, cautious. I need to speak with Vincenzo Moretti. Emily's voice was barely steady. Who is this? Emily Carter. He gave me this number. He said if I needed anything. Hold, please. Silence. Emily's heart hammered. This was insane. She was calling a criminal for help because someone from her past had shown up and... Emily. Vincenzo's voice came through, concerned. What's wrong? The simple question, asked with genuine worry rather than judgment, broke something in her. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have called. I don't know what I was thinking. Emily, breathe. Tell me what happened. She couldn't. The words stuck in her throat. Are you in danger? Vincenzo's voice sharpened. Are you hurt? No. Not physically. But someone from my past found me, and he knows things. About what happened in Afghanistan. About why I left the service. And he's threatening to— Her voice broke. I don't know what he wants, but I'm scared. Where are you right now? Home, my apartment. Are you safe there? Could this person know where you live? Emily hadn't thought of that. Her address wasn't secret. If Marcus had found the diner, he could find her apartment. I don't know. Give me your address. She should refuse. Inviting Vincenzo Moretti to her home was beyond foolish. But fear overrode sense and she recited the address. Lock your doors. Don't open them for anyone except me. I'll be there in 2 hours. You're 2 hours away? I'll be there in 2 hours. He repeated firmly. Can you hold on until then? Emily looked around her tiny apartment, her refuge that suddenly felt terribly vulnerable. Yes. Good. I'm leaving now. Emily? Yes? You did the right thing calling me. He hung up. Emily sat on her bed, phone still clutched in her hand, and wondered what she'd just set in motion. Vincenzo arrived in exactly 1 hour and 47 minutes. Emily had been watching the parking lot, jumping at every car that passed. When the dark sedan pulled up and he emerged, dressed in jeans and a dark jacket despite the desert heat, relief flooded through her. She opened the door before he could knock. Thank you for coming. Her voice was small. I'm sorry for bothering you. You're not bothering me. Vincenzo stepped inside, his presence immediately filling the small space. His eyes swept the apartment. Professional assessment, cataloging exits and sightlines. Then they landed on her face, and his expression softened. Tell me everything. Start from the beginning. Emily did. She told him about Marcus Webb, about their shared time in the service, about Kandahar. The words poured out like water from a broken dam. Everything she'd kept locked inside for 3 years. The guilt, the nightmares, the crushing weight of survival. Vincenzo listened without interrupting, sitting in her single chair while she paced. When she finally ran out of words, throat raw and eyes burning, he was quiet for a long moment. This Marcus, he said finally. What exactly did he threaten? He didn't specify. Just said we had unfinished business and that we'd be seeing each other again. And he implied he'd tell people, my boss, maybe authorities, his version of what happened in Kandahar, which is a lie. Emily stopped pacing. How do you know it's a lie? You weren't there. Vincenzo stood, moving to stand in front of her. He was taller, but he didn't use his height intimidatingly. Because I know survivors' guilt when I see it. Because someone truly at fault doesn't carry names on their skin like a penance. And because men like Marcus Webb, I know that type too. They see vulnerability and exploit it. You don't understand. I understand better than you think. Vincenzo's voice was gentle but firm. Emily, may I tell you what I see? Not a coward. A soldier who had an instinct, who hesitated because something felt wrong. That's good judgment, not cowardice. But I didn't stop them. Could you have? If you'd voiced concerns based on a feeling, would your team have halted the entire patrol? Emily opened her mouth to say yes, then stopped. Rodriguez had already dismissed her hesitation. Standard protocol was to continue unless there was concrete evidence of threat. A feeling wasn't enough. You survived, Vincenzo continued quietly, because your subconscious processed threat indicators your conscious mind missed. That's training. That's skill. That's not cowardice. Tears finally spilled down Emily's cheeks. Then why does it feel like I did something wrong? Because you're human. Because living when others don't creates guilt that logic can't erase. He paused. I told you before, different war. But I know. I've lost people I cared about. People I couldn't save no matter what I did. That weight never fully leaves. But it shouldn't define your entire existence. Emily sank onto her bed, exhausted. What am I supposed to do about Marcus? Let me handle that. She looked up sharply. Handle it how? Nothing that should concern you. I'll make some calls, gather information. Marcus Webb won't bother you again. I don't want you to hurt him. The words came out quickly. Vincenzo's expression was unreadable. I won't. Violence is rarely the best solution, despite what people assume about me. But I have other resources, ways to encourage people to leave others alone. Why are you doing this? Emily asked. You barely know me. He sat down beside her, maintaining respectful distance. Because you called for help. Because I told you I would be there if you needed me. And because— He hesitated, then continued. Because I've spent 20 years in a world where kindness is often weakness. Where every action has calculation behind it. You're not like that. You're trying to survive with dignity intact. That's rare, and worth protecting. The honesty in his voice was almost painful. Emily found herself studying his face, the lines around his eyes, the weariness she recognized. "What war did you fight?" she asked softly. "One that's never really over. One where the enemy is sometimes yourself." He smiled without humor. "But that's a conversation for another time. Right now you need to rest. You're exhausted." "I can't sleep here tonight. If Marcus knows where I live, then you won't stay here." Vincenzo pulled out his phone. "I'll arrange a hotel. Somewhere safe, somewhere he can't find you. I can't afford. Consider it a loan, or a gift. Emily, please. Let me help." She was too tired to argue, too scared to resist the offer of safety. "Okay." Within 30 minutes, Vincenzo had arranged everything. A hotel room in a different town already paid for. He drove her there himself, following while she packed a quick bag, staying close but not intrusive. At the hotel, a clean, mid-range place that felt luxurious compared to her apartment, he walked her to the room, checked it thoroughly. "Lock the door behind me," he instructed. "Don't open it for anyone. I'll call you tomorrow with updates." Emily nodded, suddenly reluctant to see him leave. "Vincenzo?" He turned at the door. "Yes? Thank you. For believing me. For not judging." Something shifted in his expression. Vulnerability showing through his usual control. "We're all carrying something, Emily. The least we can do is help each other carry it." After he left, Emily locked the door and sat on the bed. She should feel afraid, should feel compromised, in debt to a man whose world operated in shadows. Instead, for the first time in 3 years, she felt less alone. Her phone buzzed. A text from Vincenzo. "Get some sleep. You're safe, I promise." And somehow, impossibly, Emily believed him. Emily spent 3 days at the hotel. Vincenzo called each morning with updates. Always professional, always brief. Marcus Webb's background was being investigated. Arrangements were being made. She should stay put and not worry. But Emily did worry. Not just about Marcus, but about what she'd set in motion by calling Vincenzo. She'd crossed a line, accepting help from someone whose world operated outside the boundaries she'd once sworn to uphold. On the 4th morning, Vincenzo called with different news. "We need to meet. Can I pick you up in an hour?" Emily's stomach tightened. "You found something?" "Yes, I'll explain in person." He arrived exactly on time, driving a different car, a silver sedan, unremarkable. Emily climbed in, noting the tension in his jaw. "What did you find?" she asked as they drove. "Marcus Webb isn't just harassing you for personal reasons. He's involved with people I know. Indirectly. They're using the diner as a waypoint for certain operations." "What kind of operations?" Vincenzo's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "The kind I don't want you anywhere near. But it explains why he showed up. He recognized you, saw an opportunity to create leverage." "Leverage for what?" "To pressure me, eventually. My people made inquiries about him. That got back to his employers. Now they know you and I are connected." Emily's breath caught. "I've made things worse for you." "No." Vincenzo's voice was firm. "This situation existed before you. You just revealed it. Better to know than remain ignorant." They drove to a small cafe in a neighboring town. Inside, at a quiet corner table, Vincenzo laid out what he'd learned. Marcus had been tracking Emily for months, waiting for the right moment to approach. His employer saw her, a veteran with PTSD, isolated and vulnerable, as potential leverage against various parties. "Against you," Emily said quietly, "because I called you, among others, but primarily, yes." Vincenzo's dark eyes met hers. "I'm sorry. My involvement has complicated your situation. You're not responsible for Marcus being terrible." "No, but I'm responsible for what happens next." He leaned forward. "My organization is questioning my judgment. They believe helping you is a distraction, a liability." Emily's heart sank. "Then stop. I'll figure something else out." "I'm not stopping." The steel in his voice surprised her. "But you need to understand the situation fully. These people won't just go away because we ask nicely." "What are you suggesting?" "That we resolve this permanently. Not through violence," he added quickly, seeing her expression. "Through exposure. Marcus's employers can't operate if their activities become visible. I have contacts, federal agents who owe me favors. We provide them information. They handle the rest legally. You'd turn them in. I'd facilitate justice taking its course. There's a difference." Vincenzo's expression was serious. But it means you might need to provide testimony about Marcus's threats, his implications about using the diner. It means your past becomes part of an official record. Emily's hands trembled. Everyone would know about Kandahar. They'd know you served honorably and were targeted by criminals, that's all. He reached across the table, stopping just short of touching her hand. Emily, I can't force you, but this is the cleanest solution I can offer. She thought about Betty, the diner, the small life she'd built. Thought about Marcus's threats, his cruel smile. Thought about living in fear versus living with purpose. Okay, she said finally. Tell me what I need to do. What she needed to do, it turned out, was disappear for a few days while Vincenzo arranged meetings with federal contacts. Emily returned to the hotel, waiting for updates that came in frustratingly small increments. On the 6th day, everything went wrong. Emily had gone back to her apartment briefly to get more clothes despite Vincenzo's warnings to stay away. She was careful, parked a block away, watched for several minutes before approaching. Everything seemed normal. She was inside for less than 5 minutes when her phone rang. Unknown number. Hello? Emily Carter. Marcus's voice made her freeze. We need to talk. In person. I have nothing to say to you. Even if I'm at Betty's diner right now? Even if I'm having a very interesting conversation with your boss about her employee's background? Emily's blood ran cold. Leave Betty alone. This is between us. Then come here. Alone. 1 hour, or I start making phone calls. To journalists, to veterans organizations, to anyone who will listen to my version of what happened in Kandahar. The line went dead. Emily stood frozen, mind racing. She should call Vincenzo, should call the police, should do anything except what Marcus demanded. But Betty was involved now. Kind, maternal Betty who'd given her a chance when no one else would. Emily made a decision she'd regret. She drove to the diner. The parking lot was nearly empty. Too early for dinner rush. Marcus's truck sat near the entrance. Emily parked, took a breath, and went inside. Marcus sat in the back booth. Betty was behind the counter, face pale with worry. Emily, honey, you don't have to. It's okay, Betty. Emily forced calm into her voice. Marcus and I just need to talk. Why don't you take a break? I don't think... Please. Emily held her gaze, trying to communicate reassurance she didn't feel. Betty left reluctantly, heading to the kitchen but clearly listening from there. Emily slid into the booth across from Marcus. What do you want? Straight to business. I always respected that about you. Marcus smiled coldly. Here's the situation. You've been making friends with people who interfere with my employer's business. That needs to stop. I don't know what you're talking about. Vincenzo Moretti. You called him. He started investigating. That investigation is causing problems. Marcus leaned forward. You're going to call him. Tell him you made a mistake, that you don't need his help. Tell him to back off. And if I don't, then everyone learns the truth about Kandahar. About how Sergeant Emily Carter let her entire unit walk into danger while she held back. How you're collecting disability payments for trauma you caused yourself through cowardice. The words hit like always, but Emily forced herself to stay calm. That's not what happened. Doesn't matter what actually happened, only matters what people believe. Marcus's expression was cruel. So make the call. Now. Emily's hand moved toward her phone. But instead of calling Vincenzo, she did something else. She activated the voice recorder and placed it on the table. I want this conversation on record, she said clearly. You're threatening me, trying to coerce me into cutting ties with someone who's helping me, all because your employers don't like being investigated. Marcus's face darkened. You think you're clever? I think I'm done being manipulated. Emily's voice was steady despite her fear. You're going to leave. Now. And you're going to leave Betty and this diner alone. Because if you don't, this recording goes to the federal agents already investigating your employers. For a moment, Marcus looked genuinely surprised, then angry. He stood abruptly, looming over the table. You're making a big mistake. Maybe, but it's my mistake to make. He left without another word, but the look he gave her promised this wasn't over. Emily sat shaking as Betty rushed over. What was that about? Who are these people? I'm sorry, Betty. I never meant to bring trouble here. Emily's voice cracked. I should resign. Tonight. Before. Don't you dare. Betty sat down, taking Emily's hands. I don't know what's going on, but I know you're not the problem here. That man is. Emily wanted to argue, but movement outside caught her eye. Marcus hadn't left. He was on his phone in the parking lot, gesturing angrily. Her phone rang. Vincenzo. Emily, where are you? The diner. I'm sorry, I know you said not to. I'm 10 minutes away. Marcus's employers just made some calls. They know about the federal investigation. His voice was tense. Stay inside. Lock the doors. I'm coming. The next 10 minutes felt eternal. Betty locked the door at Emily's request, pulled the shades. Marcus remained in the parking lot, joined by two other men Emily didn't recognize. When Vincenzo arrived, he wasn't alone. Carlo was with him, the older man Emily had spoken to briefly on the phone. They parked blocking Marcus's truck, then approached the diner. Vincenzo's knock was firm but not aggressive. Emily unlocked the door. Vincenzo's eyes scanned her quickly, checking for injury. Are you hurt? No, just scared. She handed him her phone with the recording. I got this. Marcus threatening me, trying to force me to make you back off the investigation. Vincenzo listened to the recording, his expression growing colder. Then he walked outside. Emily watched through the window. Vincenzo and Marcus faced each other in the parking lot. No shouting, no physical confrontation, just intense conversation. Carlo stood nearby, calm but alert. Whatever Vincenzo said, it worked. Marcus and his associates got in their vehicles and left. Vincenzo returned inside, tension visible in his shoulders. It's handled, for now. What did you tell him? That the federal agents already have enough evidence to move forward. That harassing you only adds charges, and that he should be more concerned about his employers than about you. Vincenzo's dark eyes met hers. Emily, this recording, you did exactly right. This gives us leverage. Us? The word felt significant. Yes, us. Vincenzo glanced at Betty, then back to Emily. If you'll allow it. Betty had been watching this exchange with keen eyes. You're the man who left those big tips. Yes, ma'am. And you're helping Emily with whatever this is. I'm trying to. Betty studied him for a long moment. You care about her. I can see that. But your world, she gestured vaguely. It's dangerous. It is. Vincenzo agreed simply. But right now Emily needs protection my world can provide. And what does she owe you for that protection? Nothing. His voice was firm. That's not how this works. Emily felt something shift in her chest. This man, this dangerous, complicated man, was putting himself and his organization at risk for her, asking nothing in return. Why? She asked quietly. Why are you really doing this? Vincenzo was silent for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was honest in a way she'd never heard from him. Because you remind me that there are people worth protecting. Because in a life where I've made many questionable choices, helping you feels like one thing I'm doing right. And because, he paused, because you make me want to be better than I am. The vulnerability in his admission took Emily's breath away. I don't know what we're doing, she said. Your world, my past. This can't work. Can it? I don't know, Vincenzo answered honestly. But I know I've been functioning rather than living for a very long time. And somehow, you've changed that. Even if it's complicated. Even if it's messy. Emily looked at Betty, who nodded slightly. Permission and blessing combined. Then she looked back at Vincenzo. Okay, she said. Then let's figure it out together. 3 months later, spring arrived in the desert. The landscape transformed. Wildflowers blooming between cacti. Temperatures softening from brutal to bearable. Emily stood outside Betty's diner, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. So much had changed. Marcus Webb had been arrested 2 weeks after their confrontation. Federal agents, armed with evidence Vincenzo had carefully compiled, charged him with intimidation and conspiracy related to his employer's operations. He'd taken a plea deal. Emily never had to testify publicly about Kandahar. The recording of his threats was enough. The investigation had cleared Emily's name in ways she hadn't expected. A military review board, prompted by the federal case, had re-examined the Kandahar incident. Their conclusion was unambiguous. Sergeant Carter had followed proper protocol. Her survival was not cowardice but tactical awareness. The report recommended her for a commendation. Emily had cried when Vincenzo showed her the letter. Not tears of joy exactly, but of release. Years of guilt, finally acknowledged as misplaced. You were right, she'd told him. About survivor's guilt. About carrying weight that wasn't mine. We're often wrong about ourselves. Vincenzo had replied quietly. We see our failures in high definition, and our strengths in blur. Now, 3 months later, Emily was beginning to see herself differently. She'd started therapy, real therapy, with a specialist in veterans issues. The nightmares still came, but less frequently. The hypervigilance remained, but she'd learned to manage it. And Vincenzo had become something she couldn't quite define. Not quite a partner, not quite a friend. Something more complicated and more honest than either word captured. He'd kept his distance physically, never pushed for more than she could give, but he called every few days, visited the diner when business brought him to the area. They talked, really talked, about things neither shared with others. His guilt over choices made in his past. Her struggle to reconcile the soldier she'd been with the person she was becoming. The door behind her opened. Betty emerged, carrying 2 coffee cups. "Thought you could use this," the older woman said, handing one over. "Thanks." Emily sipped, savoring the familiar taste. "Betty, I've been thinking about something." "Oh? You mentioned wanting to retire. What if I bought the diner from you?" Betty's eyebrows rose. "With what money, honey?" Vincenzo offered to help. "As an investment, not a gift. I'd pay him back." Emily had rehearsed this conversation a dozen times. "But I have another idea too. What if we made this place something more? A space that helps other veterans transition to civilian life, hiring them, training them, giving them purpose." Betty's eyes misted. "That's a beautiful idea. Is it crazy?" "The best ideas usually are." Betty squeezed her shoulder. "Let's talk numbers." 2 weeks later, the deal was done. Emily Carter, owner of Betty's Diner, soon to be renamed The Waypoint, a place for travelers and veterans alike to find rest. Vincenzo had been instrumental, but he'd done it properly. Legal contracts, fair terms, everything documented. Carlo, who'd become an unlikely ally, had helped set up the business structure. "You're good at this," Carlo had told Emily during one meeting. "Bringing order to chaos. Maybe you learned something from the army after all." Emily had laughed. It felt good to laugh about her service without pain attached. On the diner's reopening day, Emily stood behind the counter in a new apron embroidered with the Waypoint logo. Betty had stayed on part-time. A young veteran named Chris, recently discharged and struggling to adjust, had been hired as a cook. Another vet, Sarah, was training as a waitress. The lunch rush was steady. Regulars mixed with new faces drawn by local press coverage of the diner's mission. Emily moved through the organized chaos feeling something she hadn't felt in years. Purpose. As the afternoon quieted, a familiar dark sedan pulled into the parking lot. Vincenzo entered, and Emily felt the now familiar flutter in her chest. He'd become important to her, she could admit that now. Not just as a helper, but as someone who understood her in ways few people could. "Busy day?" he asked, sliding into a booth. "The best kind of busy." Emily poured him coffee without asking. "What brings you out here? Can a man visit a friend?" "Friend." Emily tested the word. "Is that what we are?" Vincenzo's expression grew serious. "I'd like to be more, if you're ready. If not, I'll wait. I'm good at waiting." Emily's breath caught. They'd been circling this conversation for weeks. "Your world and mine, they're so different." "They are, but I'm making changes. Stepping back from certain operations, focusing on legitimate businesses." He paused. "Because of you. Because you made me want to be better. That's a lot of pressure to put on someone." "Then think of it differently. You didn't change me. You reminded me who I wanted to be. There's a difference." Emily sat down across from him, for once not worried about the propriety of it. This was her diner now. Her rules. "I'm still figuring out who I am," she said honestly. "Still working through a lot." "I know. I'm not asking for perfection, just possibility." Emily looked around her diner, filled with people finding their own way forward. Veterans starting over, regulars who'd become friends, a space she'd created from pain and hope. "Okay," she said finally. "Let's try. Slow, careful, honest." Vincenzo's smile was genuine, reaching his eyes in a way she'd rarely seen. "I can do slow and honest." As evening fell, Emily found herself at a table with Vincenzo, sharing a meal like normal people. They talked about small things. His nephew's upcoming graduation, her plans to expand the diner's menu, the ridiculous heat forecast for next week. Normal, simple, real. Later, standing in the parking lot as he prepared to leave, Vincenzo took her hand, the first time he'd touched her beyond a handshake. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For calling me that night. For trusting me. For giving me a reason to be better." Emily squeezed his hand. "Thank you for showing up. For not judging. For helping me carry what I couldn't carry alone. He left, but the warmth of his touch remained. Inside, Emily locked up the diner, turning off lights one by one. In the darkness, she paused at the window, looking at her reflection. The scared woman who'd served a dangerous stranger 3 months ago seemed like a different person. She pulled up her sleeve, looking at her tattoo. Rodriguez, Chen, Patterson, Miller. The names would always be there. But now they felt less like a burden and more like a reminder. She'd survived. And maybe, finally, she was learning to live. Outside, the desert night was vast and full of stars. Inside, Emily Carter stood in her diner, her second chance, and felt something she'd thought lost forever: hope.